So for this example, let's just go ahead and follow the steps. All right, so for number one, find and plot the period. Period is 2 pi over b. So we have the period equals 2 pi over b. Now what's b? You should be thinking about this here. B is the number in front of the variable, the independent variable. There's nothing there, and so we don't say it's 0, we say it's 1. So it's 1 times theta, and so the period is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. And it says find and plot the period. Now here's one little trick. All right, we notice that we have a theta minus something, so we're going to end up having to shift. Remember how we have x minus 2, we shift 2 to the right, x minus 3, shift 3 to the right. Well, if we have x minus pi over 4, we're going to shift pi over 4 to the right. And so since we are going to shift to the right, we're going to want to leave a little space to the right. So we're going to draw our vertical axis a little bit closer to the left end, and we're going to plot the end of our period with a little bit of space to the right of it. So that's our find and plot the period, and the period again is 2 pi, so we've done that. Then the next part here, the next few parts should become it's kind of like second nature to you. 0 to 2 pi, we cut that in half and we label it. Halfway between 0 and 2 pi is 1 pi. Half of pi is the next step. Cut that in half. And then you should develop your own way or method for knowing how to label that point right there, that tick mark on the x-axis or the theta axis right there. Again, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. And if you just want to remember the rule, just multiply that number there by 3. So 3 times pi over 2 is 3 pi over 2. That takes care of labeling the horizontal axis. Now we want to label the vertical axis, and it says for number 5, find and plot the amplitude. So the amplitude equals the absolute value of a, and that's our a right there, so a equals -2. And so we have the absolute value of -2, which is 2. So again, we're going to find and plot the amplitude. We found it. Let's plot it. There's 2. There's -2. And then it says plot the 5 key points that correspond to the parent function. Now, if you remember, when we graphed y equals the cosine of x, we started up here at 0. When x is 0, we start at the high point, the top of the amplitude. And but if we have a -2 there, that's positive. So if you remember, like every other function we've graphed, anytime when a is negative, we flip it over the x-axis. In this case, the theta axis. So, and we're going to draw this one also in as a dashed line, because it says connect the dots with a smooth curve, dashed if, I'm pointing to something you can't even see. So this is the part I'm looking at here. We plotted the 5 key points. Correspond to the parent function, so we didn't actually do that part. So let's do that part first. So we plot the 5 key points. So I don't remember what I just said because my phone was ringing, and I went and turned it off, and now I'm trying to remember what I just said. So I think we were at the part where I didn't plot the 5 key points, and the 5 key points on the parent function are these key points here. Now that connects, we connect those dots with the curved, little curved line there. And then, but again, when the a is negative, we have to flip this graph over the x-axis or the theta axis. And so we're going to draw that also dashed. So we have this point here, this point gets reflected, the one on the bottom gets reflected, and the one on the top gets reflected. So it actually look like this. So flipping this graph over the horizontal axis would look like that. Now this is the graph we're going to actually move, and so if you look back at the instructions here, and again, connect the dots with a smooth curve, dash if c is greater or is not equal to 0. And that's exactly what we have here. When we look at the function, we have theta minus pi over 4, and that pi over 4 there, whatever is being subtracted from the theta, that's our c value. So c is equal to pi over 4. And so therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to move this most recent graph that we did, this transformation, we're going to move it pi over 4 radians to the right. So how do we find that? Well, that's what the next part is. We're going to take each of these key points and we're going to move pi over 4 to the right. Well, we don't have pi over 4s labeled on our axis right now, so we have to actually label those. Pi over 4 is halfway between 0 and pi over 2. So there's our pi over 4. And if you remember now, we're going to divide, basically we're going to divide each of these sections into two equal sections. So from here to here is pi over 4, 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and so forth. All right, and then we have 7 pi over 4, and then we have 5, 7, 9 pi over 4. So we're labeling the key points now on the new graph that will be shifted pi over 4 radians to the right. And that's where we can fill in the actual graph. So this is the one right here. This one up here is cosine of x. This one down here, or 2 cosine x. This one down here is negative 2 cosine x. But we don't have just negative 2 cosine x. We have negative 2 cosine of x, or theta, minus pi over 4. So again, we're going to move this point here to the right pi over 4. Each key point gets moved to the right pi over 4. This one here gets moved to the right pi over 4. I know it's getting a little busy. That guy there. And then we got to remember we're starting down here. Start down here, we end down here. That gets moved pi over 4 radians to the right as well. So this guy here goes up, follows the exact path. And let's see here. Oh, I messed up. So that's not that one. We go up here, and this point right here gets moved pi over 4 to the right. So that's what. So we go down. We start here from down here, and we go up here to this point, through that one, through that point. The key points are now at all those odd numbers of pi over 4. 1 pi over 4, key point there. 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4, and 9 pi over 4. And that's drawing one period of this graph right here, and that's it. The rest of it's going to take practice, and you're going to get a chance to practice.